I'd like to ask our guests and visitors in the rear of the chamber and in the gallery to please stand for our prayer. Please stand for our prayer. Today's prayer will be offered by Assemblymember Thurman. Assemblymember Thurman.
Good morning, members. Let us pray. Lord, we come before you today to give thanks for the day. We give thanks for this day of celebration of the life and legacy of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his work. We come to you and ask for your wisdom to continue that work, to end poverty, to stamp out inequality, to live the principles of nonviolence, and to stamp out violence wherever it exists, in whatever form it may show up in. We ask for your guidance for how we interact with one another, and that when we see another, we simply see a sister or a brother. Guidance to help us stamp out hate and racism and prejudice of any kind. As we hearken on the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, that anyone can be great because anyone can serve. Lord, we ask that you use us as your change agents to serve your people well in our communities, in our state, in our nation, and in our world. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May God bless us all. In all these things we pray, let us all say, amen.
We ask our guests and visitors to remain standing and join us for the flag salute. Join Assemblymember Burke as she leads us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. Reading of the previous day's journal.
Assembly Chamber, Sacramento, Tuesday, January 12, 2016. The Assembly met at 7 a.m.
Ms. Garcia moves and Mr. Mays seconds that the reading of the previous day's journal be dispensed with. Presentation of petitions, there are none. Introduction and reference of bills will be deferred. Reports of committees will be deemed read and amendments deemed adopted. Messages from the governor, there are none. Messages from the Senate, there are none. Moving to motions and resolutions for the absences of the day for legislative business. We have members Garcia, Ridley Thomas, Linder, and Wilk. For personal business, we have Assemblymember Chavez, and for illness, we have Assembly members Bloom and Holden. And at this time, Ms. Garcia, you're recognized for your motions. Ms. Garcia.
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 45.5 and allow Assembly members Cooley, Cooper, Dodd, Gomez, Lopez, and Asarian to speak on adjournment in memory today.
Without objection, that request is granted.
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to suspend Joint Rule 62A, the file notice requirements to allow the Judiciary Committee to hear AB 54 upon adjournment of session today in room 4202.
Without objection, that request is granted.
Pursuant to Assembly Rule 96, I request unanimous consent to withdraw AB 1272 and AB 1500 from the Appropriations Committee and place those bills on the second reading file. Recent amendments made the bill non-fiscal.
Without objection, the request is granted.
At the request of the author, I am giving a one-day notice of intent to remove file A6, AB 710 from the inactive file.
The clerk will so note.
With permission from the authors, I request unanimous consent to strike all governor vetoes from the file with the exception of the following file items. File item 36, AB 573. File item 47, AB 825. File item 48, AB 895. File item 50, AB 1023. File item 52, AB 10. File item 87, AB 465. These 6 items will remain on file.
Without objection, the request is granted. At this time, we have one guest introduction. I'd like to recognize Mr. Patterson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to introduce a constituent of mine from Central California, Deanna Allen. She is accompanied by a group of exchange students from the Ukraine, Georgia, and Italy. They are here for a year as part of the Future Leaders Exchange program. Please welcome them to the California Legislature.
Colleagues, we're going to move to business on the daily file. Moving to the second reading, there are no items on the second reading. Going now to the regular session, we're going to pass and retain file item 1. We're also going to pass and retain file items 97 through 99. And at this time, we're going to take up file item 100, AB 326. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 326 by Assemblymember Frazier and Acolyte in Public Works.
Mr. Frazier, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. AB 326 sets a 30-day deadline by which the Department of Industrial Relations must reimburse the collateral deposit for adjudicated Division of Labor Standards enforcement prevailing wage hearings. The bill is sponsored by the Associated General Contractors of California, and there is no opposition. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 The clerk will close the roll and tally the votes. Aye 62, no 0. The measure passes. Moving now to file item 101, AB 488. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 488 by Assemblymember Gonzalez and Acolyte to Employment Discrimination.
Assemblymember Gonzalez, you may open.
Thank you. Good morning. AB 488 would fix a glaring omission in worker protections ensured by the California Fair Employment and Housing Act. FEHA currently exempts employees with disabilities working in sheltered workshops and rehabilitation centers from all of its legal protections and recourse against discrimination and harassment on basis of gender, race, and religion. It's time to extend these civil rights to workers under special minimum wage licenses regardless of their workplace setting. This bill received unanimous bipartisan support in Assembly Labor and Employment Committee, and I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Aye 65, no 0. Measure passes. Moving now to file item 102, ACR 9. The clerk will read.
Assembly Concurrent Resolution 9 by Assemblymember McCarty and others relative to Pet Care Education Month.
Mr. McCarty, you may open on the measure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise today to present ACR 9, which commemorates January 2016 as Pet Care Education Month. This resolution encourages California pet owners to take responsible steps to ensure proper care for their pets, including regular veterinary visits and necessary medications as part of their program as well. Pets, as we know, are an important part of our lives and can be devastating both emotionally and financially when they're facing serious health issues. Animal welfare organizations like your county and city shelters, and like the one we have here in Sacramento on Front Street, know this firsthand, that it can be very costly and difficult for families when occurrences happen. So better preventative medicine is a good step and also can help local governments when they provide services for the community. Please join me in supporting this measure, and I'd ask the first roll be open for co-authors.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, Mr. McCarty has asked the first roll to be open for co-authors. The clerk will open the roll. Members, this is for co-authors. This is for co-authors. The clerk will close the roll. There are 62 co-authors added. Without objection, we can take a voice vote on this measure. All those in favor, please say aye. All opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it, and the resolution is adopted. Going now to file item 103, ACR 109. The clerk will read.
Assembly Concurrent Resolution 109 by Assemblymember Cooper relative to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Mr. Cooper, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise today to pay tribute to the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his unwavering commitment to securing equal rights for all. January 18th, 2016 will mark the 30th celebration of the national holiday for Dr. King. Dr. King's vision of having a more just and equal society paved the way for the landmark legislation, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Without Dr. King's tireless work, someone like me would not have been afforded the same opportunities that made it possible for myself to be standing here today in front of you, nor would many of my colleagues be in this body. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of hosting the Legislative Black Caucus Civil Rights Breakfast and was truly inspired by all those who came together to honor the work of this great man. As we reflect on how he permanently changed our country and his ideals, we must remember that much more work needs to be done to complete his vision. This body has the knowledge and the power to make a positive difference in our society. I challenge my colleagues in this body to stand up for Dr. King's ideals to create a more just and equal society for all. As the state legislators, we owe this commitment of equality for all those who elected us to represent their best interests. Dr. King was a man who fought against poverty, racism, inequality, things we're still fighting for today. By coming together to honor Dr. King, we will forever keep his dream alive. I respectfully ask for your aye vote on this measure and ask that the first row be open for co-authors. Thank you.
I'd like to recognize Mr. Levine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This resolution celebrates the life of a civil rights leader who fought selflessly for urgently needed action. Despite many setbacks, he was ultimately able to make a profound change in our great nation. Dr. Martin Luther King once said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." Activism requires tremendous commitment, dedication, and passion. Dr. King taught us that the work of activism is vital. If we are not a catalyst for change, we must be prepared to embrace the status quo. And let us be clear, the status quo is unacceptable. Protecting civil rights today means bringing an end to gun violence. Fighting for equality today means making sure that working families can earn an honest day's pay for an honest day's work without subjection to poverty. And fighting to protect human rights today means recognizing victims of human trafficking, which is nothing less than modern-day slavery. As a nation, as a state, as a community, we must stand up and protect human and civil rights for everyone. As we celebrate the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., let us also celebrate those who continue the fight. I thank the author for bringing this resolution forward, and I urge an aye vote.
Ms. Garcia, you're recognized.
Good morning, members. It's an honor to rise today on behalf of the Legislative Women's Caucus to honor the life of Martin Luther King Jr. His actions helped pave the way for a better world for all of us, for women and our communities. King's work ensured equality of treatment and opportunity to all. When President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the most sweeping civil rights legislation since Reconstruction, he did so because of the work of Dr. King. The act prohibited discrimination of any kind based on race, color, national origin, religion, and of course, gender. Dr. King worked alongside countless others in the pursuit of equality for men and women. The Civil Rights Act was signed into law 1 year after the Equal Pay Act. He understood that the fight for equal rights does not stop at the color of your skin, your gender, or your religion. We as women need to continue his legacy and work towards equality for all. We all deserve equal treatment in education, the workforce, in our homes, and in our paychecks, and in our representation. Thank you.
I'd like to recognize Mr. Williams.
Colleagues, Madam Speaker, members, as chair of the API Legislative Caucus, I rise in strong support of ACR 109. It's an honor and privilege to be here with you today in recognizing and celebrating the remarkable achievements of community organizer and leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. My talking points say that he changed the face of America, but that's not quite true. More importantly than that, he inspired hundreds of thousands and then millions of people to change the face of America, and that creates real, deep change. The civil rights era was a movement of many people who came together to fight injustice against African Americans and then against all communities of color. But it didn't stop there. He stood courageously for peace, for workers' rights, and for the stand that communities of faith cannot stand for injustice. As servants of the public, let us make a commitment to furthering the work of Dr. King. Please join me in voting aye on this important measure and for redoubling the efforts in our hearts to stand for this kind of courage.
I'd like to recognize Ms. Eggman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today on behalf of the LGBT caucus to also pay tribute to the great man, Martin Luther King, who has been an inspiration, I think, to all of us who have dedicated our life to service, because that's what he called for, that if we had the power to serve, that we certainly had the opportunity to make a change in our own community. And while the work he did was great, we all know that there is still so much to do. And especially as we reflect upon the issues around poverty and gun violence and homelessness that is on the rise in all of our communities. And we look at the faces that are out there on the streets, and especially we know the transgender community now is somewhat the most marginalized. Transgender people of color are on the streets more often than anybody else, victimized more than anybody else. Our work, members, is not done. We stand today in Martin Luther King's honor. Let us also stand today with the commitment to renew our dedication to being able to help those provide meaning so that they can do it themselves. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
I'd like to recognize Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. When asked to speak today about this, I'd say, what would Martin Luther King want me to speak about? What can I say to inspire and to keep his dream alive? How can I put myself in his shoes? He had daily threats. He had daily threats against his body, against his family's body. But in reality, I can only look to the future and marvel at what happened as a result of Dr. King's vision. My own history of Dr. King's vision brings me here. And for me, the contribution as chair of the Assembly Aging and Long-Term Care Committee makes me know that we have to ensure that our seniors and those with disabilities are not left behind. As we're recovering from this economic recession, it's time to bring them along with us. Martin Luther King would want nothing less. I know that any position that one takes to protect poor people and hardworking families is not going to be the most popular. But if you look at Dr. King's life, you get inspiration. And Dr. King wants us to work not as fingers of a hand, but to work together as a fist. So as Mary McLeod Bethune said, we can strike a mighty blow. I plan to continue this work and to strike that mighty blow so that we can protect the seniors and those with disabilities in our state. Thank you.
Assemblymember Chang, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am so grateful we continue to mark this day and proclaim its importance. Martin Luther King delivered his dream speech in 1963, long before I was born, but it still touches us today because it was a masterpiece built on prose, reflecting our country's highest values, freedom and equality. King is really the paragon of the civil rights movement in America, and I think that's because we have all benefited from the movement he led. To be standing in this room as a Taiwanese-born woman, I am standing on his shoulders. Freedom and equality is a value this country has stood for going back to the founding fathers, but we are not perfect. And at times, certain leaders arise to remind us what those values mean. Yes, we still need to improve. As I said, we are not perfect, but when I see what kind of society we have built, in part because of King, it is moving. Thank you so much for bringing this resolution forward.
Mr. Alejo, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. On behalf of my colleagues of the Latino Caucus, I also stand to honor a great man who did so much for our nation and for our state. Dr. King once said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, and those words ring true for all of us here. And that is why we come to these halls of the legislature to follow Dr. King's example and help bend that arc closer and closer towards the goal of justice. Dr. King continues to be an icon, not only to people of color, but all Americans of all walks of life, for his commitment to equality and compassion for all people, regardless of their race, their color, or their creed. But the fruits of Dr. King's struggle were realized with the signing of that historic 1965 Federal Voting Rights Act, which helped finally make the fundamental right, the right to vote, the right to register to vote, the right to run for office, a reality for people regardless of their skin color. The Voting Rights Act continues to be treasured by Latinos all across California, and it has helped make members of this body more representative of the people of our great state. But it's a significant reason why soon both houses of this legislature will be led by Latinos for the first time in California history, and that's something I'm truly proud of. But today, across our country, we hear rhetoric on a national scale, attacking and demonizing Muslims, Mexicans, immigrants, and women by national political candidates, and reminds us that even though we've come a long way in our nation, that we still have a long way to go. Let's not kid ourselves. Dr. King said that the truest test of a person is not where we stand in times of comfort or convenience, but where we stand in times of challenge and controversy. So on days like this, it's not just enough to say a few nice words, but when we hear people attacking Americans of this, that create this multicultural fabric of America, that we have to stand up and speak out and say that it's wrong and stand up for their civil rights and social justice for those who are being attacked. But lastly, I also want to take a moment just to acknowledge the many other courageous freedom fighters, civil rights heroes whose names don't often get mentioned, but who stood with Dr. King. One of those was a good friend of mine, Mr. Bob Fitch of Watsonville, who is currently in very poor health, but as a young man was a photographer for the Southern Christian Leadership Council. He was a photographer for Dr. King. And when he was assassinated, Coretta Scott King asked him to be the family photographer for the funeral. And he captured many of the closest moments during Dr. King's life when he was organizing communities throughout the South. And in fact, his photograph of Dr. King with the photograph of Mohandas Gandhi in his office was used by the sculptors to create the MLK Memorial in Washington, D.C. And I was honored to have him as my campaign photographer back in 2010. And it's these many civil rights heroes like Bob Fitch that we also remember as we honor the legacy of Dr. King today.
Mr. Cooley, you're recognized.
Colleagues, I'm pleased to rise in support of this. I do so on behalf of my granddaughter Anna, who has an African American heritage, and also as I reflect upon the significance of this day, on behalf of Abigail, a young mother in Rancho Cordova that I was visiting with at 1:30 this past Wednesday morning, as she was in our church caring for a few dozen homeless folks who had a safe and warm place to sleep that night. Earlier this week, I had the privilege of joining my colleagues from San Bernardino in a prayer service for legislators in our responsibilities over here at the Cathedral of the Blessed Sacrament. As a part of that, reflecting as well upon the events of San Bernardino, we heard quoted that great quote from Pastor Niemöller from Hitler's Germany. They came for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. They came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I was not a trade unionist. They came for the Catholics, and I did not speak up because I was a Protestant. And then they came for me, and there's no one left to speak up. On this occasion, we remember a towering individual who reminded us of the ties of all Americans one to another and the equality of all Americans. And this is, in our coinage, as I have pointed out, e pluribus unum, out of many one. It is an ongoing work of Americans to try to live out that value. And as recently as I say, in the wee hours of Wednesday morning, I heard Abigail, a young mom from Rancho Cordova, who, when she was 12, was homeless, who now each night this week was out in the middle of the night providing this safe place for homeless individuals. And when I talked with her about it, she says, well, I was homeless. I'm here to listen to their voices and make sure they know that they are valued. And I think this is what we all want to live out. This is the aspiration of Martin Luther King. And I'm so grateful to join my colleague from the 9th Assembly District and all of you as we take this up. Thank you very much.
Mr. Hadley, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join all of my colleagues in voicing my strong support for this resolution commemorating the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. I've been inspired by everything that's been said on this floor. I particularly want to thank my colleague from Richmond for his inspiring opening prayer and his reminder that Dr. King was motivated by many things, including his strong faith. Colleagues, you may remember that a year ago at this time, I spoke of a recent outrage that had taken place in my hometown of Manhattan Beach. The home of the Clinton family in Manhattan Beach was attacked in the middle of the night. A burning tire was rolled against their front doorstep and caused a significant fire. The Clintons are African American. One of their two children is a classmate of my daughter's in high school, and although we have not known them well, they have been acquaintances of ours. You may also recall that in response, friends of the Clintons organized a candlelight prayer vigil in downtown Manhattan Beach that my wife Suzanne and I were able to attend, and that was, I believe, the largest event in downtown Manhattan Beach in the over 20 years that my family and I have lived in the city. It was a very inspiring community response to this attack. I had the opportunity, I've had a couple opportunities in the last year to speak with Mr. Clinton and just check in. I believe that while these commemorations and these events are very important to remind us of the vision and the work of Dr. King, these aren't one-off events. It's our responsibility to heal our community by our actions every day. And most recently, I had a chance to talk to Mr. Clinton this week just to find out how his family is doing and how the investigation is proceeding. And I'm very pleased to report, and just to quote Mr. Clinton, "We are doing well and we are happy to be back in our home. We would not be back in our home without the help of many friends and members of our community, and we want to thank everybody who showed us love and who helped us get back into our home before the holidays." So that's the good news. Unfortunately, while this case remains very much open, Mr. Clinton also told me that as far as he knows, there are no current suspects in the investigation. So this is a crime that remains unsolved. So on behalf of the South Bay and Manhattan Beach, our prayers and love and support go out to Ron Clinton and his family, and we are so pleased that they continue to feel loved and continue to share their community with us. And then finally, on a lighter note, I'm pleased to report that my South Bay city of Gardena has been running the longest-running annual Martin Luther King Day parade west of the Mississippi. They started their parade before this was a national holiday. This is the 32nd annual parade that the city of Gardena is hosting, and my family and I are looking forward to being there tomorrow. I strongly urge an aye vote for this resolution.
Mr. Jones Sawyer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the California Legislative Black Caucus, we too are here to honor a great American. Dr. Martin Luther King is one of the best examples of servant leadership the world has ever known. He was born 87 years ago. He died at the age of 39. He was slain at the age of 39. As many of you know, yesterday was my birthday, and I turned 59. And to realize what this young man did in 39 years and what I've just striving to do in my 59 years humbled me in ways you'll never know. And as I started thinking about what he did, a leader who consistently put the needs of others before his own, a leader who, in understanding the challenges of the time, willingly put his life on the line to advocate for fairness and equality, a leader who changed the world in 12 short years, something that many of us in this chamber can only aspire to. A leader whose example should continually inspire each of us to be a better public servant. This means, as Dr. Weber said, and so eloquently said yesterday at the King breakfast, and we all know Dr. Weber is the moral compass of this body. Having the courage to make decisions in the face of adversity that truly serve our constituents is what we should strive for every day. The other thing that I will paraphrase from Dr. Weber yesterday, she urges each of us in this chamber and outside this chamber, but most important in this chamber, that the fulfillment of Dr. King's dream is whether or not we will be Dr. King's dream or will we be his nightmare. And to paraphrase what I think she meant, we should stand up every day for our constituents. We should every day embody the principles of Dr. King. And quite frankly, on any issue, whether it's oil, which we know in disadvantaged communities, it is a problem. If you look at who works on those derricks, you don't see a whole lot of black and brown people. In the environmental community, there's not a whole lot of black and brown people involved in that. But to be fighting over it is not what Dr. King wanted us to do. He did not want black and brown to be fighting with one another. We would be remiss if we continued the kind of race baiting and fighting, because that's what Dr. King died for. And when I finish here after 12 years, I do not want to be part of a body, of a group that push forward the kind of divisiveness that my caucus colleague talked about in Latino caucus, about dividing people, whether by religion, by immigration status. Dr. King and Cesar Chavez would be turning over in their grave if they didn't know that we weren't coming together in this body to do all we could for our kids, especially in education, because we all know black and brown kids are not only falling behind, but they're falling off the map as far as education. It is our responsibility in the memory of both of those great leaders that we pull this together. And so I ask each of you, when you think of this day and every day, ask yourself, will you be the fulfillment of Dr. King, and I will add, Cesar Chavez's dream, or will we be the nightmare? It is with humility, reverence, gratitude that I respectfully ask for your aye vote on ACR 109, and I also ask the first row be up for co-authors. Thank you.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, Mr. Cooper, would you like to close?
Respectfully ask for your aye vote. Excuse me.
And I understand you would also like the first roll to be open for co-authors. At this time, the clerk will open the roll. Members, this is for co-authors. Members, this is for co-authors. The clerk will close the roll. There are 69 co-authors added. And without objection, we can take a voice vote on this measure. All those in favor, please say aye. All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. This resolution is adopted.